Daisy Turner was one of Vermont's most remarkable storytellers. She died in February 1988 at the age of 104. Fortunately, many Turner stories have been recorded, and they bring to life a time in American history that most of us have only read about.
All of these young people now, they can't imagine that 100 years ago they had these Negro slaves down here in the United States. They don't know nothing about it, and I tell some of these things that they look at me as if they think, well, she must be a little loony. Well, I ain't loony. When they were beating them and working them, and they were slaves for sale in this United States at Washington, D.C.
I remember Aunt Daisy as being a very articulate person. She was never at a loss for words. She had a memory similar to a computer. She could reach back and quote dates, names, places, occasions over and over again, and they'd still be the same.
Aunt Daisy was especially proud of her father, and she idolized him. He taught her about mending fences and chopping wood, tending to the livestock, and she just loved being with him all the time. Her father told her all of the things that happened to him when he was on the plantation.
When the masters could see that the different colored slaves and things could sing or do something, then they made these little things. All the wood, cut the trees and bent it back and it played like a guitar. They didn't have the money and things to buy nothing. But when the master could see that some of them were smart to do like that, then the master would buy them something, an instrument and help them to get a banjo or guitar. And then they'd sing for the white master and things when they had parties. You ask, what make this darky weep? Why he, like the others, am not gay? What make the tears roll down his cheeks from early morn till close of day? My story, darkies, you shall hear, for in my memory fresh it dwell. It will call each one to shed a tear o'er the grave of my sweet Kitty Wells. See, we didn't just come from nothing and nowhere. We've got a background, and the background be traced right down to the roots, and that is it.
Daisy Turner, who died in 1988 at the age of 104. I'm Barbara Jordan. The Turner family traces its origin, by word of mouth, back to Africa. Early in the last century, says Daisy Turner, a ship came by, somewhere just off the coast of Ghana. The ship was carrying a woman who was to become Daisy's great-grandmother.
This English bride and groom was on their honeymoon to Africa on the ship of the bride's father when this terrible storm came up and the ship went to pieces on the coast of Africa. It was a terrible disaster, and this happened right in the early 1800s.
I can remember my Aunt Daisy relating a story where an English ship was wrecked off the west coast of Africa, and one of the people rescued was a bride who was on board. She later became the wife of the chieftain's son who rescued her, and a boy was born to them named Alexander.
He grew up there with them and with her, and he got to be very clever and smart and learning English from her. In fact, he was too smart because he got interested in the slave ships that seemed to have come to that section about every 3 months. He was between 18 and 22 when he was getting different slaves together there for the slave ships that he was selling and making deals with the United States slave ships. And they took him on the slave ship as a slave with them. It seemed to have been one of the worst trips that the slave owners had made, and the slaves died, and women had children on the ship and in the hold, and different diseases cropped out, and they had to, so many died that they had to bury them at sea until the captain didn't know what to do.
After many hardships, the slave vessel landed in New Orleans. There, Alexander was bought by a Virginia plantation owner. But Alexander was different from the other slaves. He spoke English, and, says Daisy Turner, he was hard to control. For this reason, Alexander did not end up in the fields with the other slaves.
They said that he was so arrogant and hard to handle that the overseer couldn't get on. So the head overseer and the master decided to put him in a different line of work, and he became a fighter for the master. And he went around doing fights, fist fighting and chicken fighting, and so he did this fighting for the trophies and money for the master.
Aunt Daisy used to tell of my grandfather's father fighting for his owner all over the South. Prize fighting this was. And on one occasion, he met an Indian lady named Princess Silverbells.
Grandfather was there fighting when he met this Cherokee Indian girl. He fell in love at once for Princess Silverbells, and she for him. Well, then you see, the master, old Golden, liked grandfather, and so he done anything that he could to help him and to please him and make him happy. So he allowed Princess Silverbell to go back to the plantation, and then they were given a cabin right near the big house, the White House. She wasn't put down with the others, and the white missus took to her right away, and then she admired her beaded dress and moccasins and things. And so when she found that she could sew and mend and do everything, then they knew how valuable she would be, because she could make those red coats for the white men to wear when they were horseback riding and all. And she used to sew and mend and everything for them.
Princess Silverbells was also called Rosabelle, or Rose. In 1845, Rose and Alexander had a son, Alec, who became Daisy Turner's father. I'm Barbara Jordan.
He didn't know nothing else to talk about, my father, except in Virginia, the plantation, and what he knew about slavery, and his father and mother's talk down there.
Down there was Viginia, where Daisy Turner's father was born a slave. He used to tell stories about his father, Daisy's grandfather, who traveled for the master all around the South as a boxer. When he accidentally killed his opponent in the ring, he vowed to fight no more. Soon after, probably in 1849, Daisy's grandfather was killed, crushed by a falling barn rafter. Daisy's grandmother continued to work on the plantation as a seamstress, making fine clothes for the master's family. As Daisy Turner recalls, it was because of these clothes that 5-year-old Alec, her father, gradually began to realize he was different from his white playmates.
The little boys, John and Frank and George and the different ones, all was dressed different than he. And he couldn't understand why he always was barefooted He never had any shoes or little stockings with rings running around them or little short pants on or a little white blouses and colored blouses that had little ruffles at the neck and ruffles around the sleeve. And all he wore was just this one little piece belted in and sometimes little pants underneath them and with no shoes ever or anything. And he was just their size and all, and they played together. And he began asking his mother why he didn't look like them and all. But he said she was constantly sewing, and she never seemed to be able to make him happy or explain why he didn't look like the little boys he played with. And so he said after a while, she made him some little moccasins from little pieces of scrap. After she'd made the red coats and things, she made these little moccasins for him and put on little beads on the toe and all. And oh, how he loved to put them on and strut around. But he noticed after a while that every time the missus came down to the cabin or anyone was around, she would always take them off his feet and hide them so that he couldn't have them on to show them off. And he wondered why she did that. And finally, when the little white girl was having this party, and the mother and she kept coming back and forth, trying on the dress with the ruffles and things, one morning he had on these little moccasins when she came down, the white lady, so that the lady, white lady, discovered these red shoes on his feet. And what did she do but grab those little moccasins from his feet and throw them in the fire? And he said, what did she do that for? But that's what she did. And so he just made a rush for her and grabbed her and tore her dresses and skirts and ruffled off, and finally she fell to the floor. And he bit her legs and bit her hands, and oh, he fought with her terribly. And he says she fainted dead away. And of course he said he never forgot it as long as he lived, that awful, awful look in his mother's eyes.
Storyteller Daisy Turner. I'm Barbara Jordan. In 1845, Daisy Turner's father, Alec, was born a slave on a Virginia plantation. As a child, Alec was put to work tending sheep, driving the cows to pasture, and cleaning stables. His days on the plantation passed with their measure of hard work, lightened from time to time by celebrations and homemade entertainment. The masters found these slaves to be good singers, instrumentalists, and dancers. Daisy Turner remembers her father singing Nellie Gray, one of the songs popular among the slaves.
Oh, my poor Nellie Gray, they have taken you away, and I'll never see my darling any more. They have taken her to Georgia for to wear her life away, while I toiled mid the cotton and the cane. And then he sings, one night I went to see her, she'd gone, the neighbors say, that a white man came and he bound her up in chains while I toiled on the old Kentucky shore. Oh, my poor... My father said such a terrible situation was existing that no one could imagine it at all. Like he told about the first little colored girl, slave girl she was, that he kind of liked. But he said some of the white men started after her, and she didn't know what to do, but she ran and jumped in the Rappahannock River and was drowned. And he said that that was the year that he was 14, and he began realizing more and more that he must get away and to this freedom.
Alec Turner's stories burned these images into his daughter's brain and heart.
I'm 100, and it's just 120 years ago that they were putting me up on the block. How much am I offered for this woman, this nigger woman, this slave woman, or anything? Just 100 years ago, they could put me right up and do that, any dark-skinned people. And at the same time, they was having children by them dark women, and it got to where they were putting up their own children, selling them, like food.
Daisy Turner. I'm Barbara Jordan. Daisy Turner says her father, Alec, was born on the John Golden Plantation on the Rappahannock River in Port Royal, Virginia. Census records show that 77 slaves worked Golden's 2,000 acres.
The northern border of the Golden Plantation was on the Rappahannock River, and I can remember my grandfather talking about hauling seine. He mentioned the fish called sturgeon, and it was full of seafood, and because it was tidewater, probably loaded with crabs and other seafood that would be peculiar to that particular area.
Bruce Turner lived with his grandfather Alec from 1919 to 1923 and heard many stories about plantation life.
As a youngster, when my grandfather was 14, 15 years old, he used to haul seine along with other members of the plantation along the Rappahannock River. And while they were doing this, they would sing various songs, like Been a Listening All the Night Long, John Saw the Number, which was rhythmic and reminds me of some of the songs that railroad workers would use when they were pounding the ties in and beating on the spikes to put in railroad tracks. My grandfather used to say that if slaves didn't work fast enough, hard enough, early enough to satisfy the overseer, the result would be a beating. One of the ways that the overseers got the attention of the slaves was to whip them with boards which had holes bored into them, and when applied to the skin, it would crack it. After this, brine was swabbed on the area, and this would sting more, and the person would be uncomfortable for a number of days. That was how they kept them under control.
My father said when he was 12, they had offered to buy him from the master for $12,000. They offered old Golden $12,000 for my father as a breeder for the slaves down in Virginia. And old Golden wouldn't sell him. He said he wouldn't sell him at any price. So that his father said when they had told the overseers to kind of pacify my father, not to to whip him or beat him or touch him in any way because he was so valuable.
Daisy and Bruce Turner, daughter and grandson of Alec Turner. I'm Barbara Jordan. Vermont storyteller Daisy Turner often spoke of a small book that had belonged to her father, Alec Turner. It was a primer, a beginner reader. It was a reminder of his plantation days as a slave.
That little primer had, why, everybody in town here had seen that little primer. My father brought it from the war and used to carry it, and I always kept it up on the hill and used to show it. As I tell you, I used to show these things to verify the truth.
The truth is the Turner family story of her parents' slavery. Daisy Turner recalls that one of the jobs her father had to do on the plantation was to take care of the cows.
Father says he had got to be, as he remembered, maybe 7, going on 8, when he, at that time, was filling these jars or bottles at that time of milk for these different ones, the slaves and the poor white people that came to get the milk to the milk house. And so that is where the little missus had somehow obtained a little primer. I can't tell you the name, and I thought I would never forget the name of that primer from the blood that was on it of my father. And so this little missus was teaching my father ABCs and RAT and things like that.
My grandfather's owner's granddaughter was slightly older than my grandfather, and she is the person who, behind some building, would teach him how to read and write his alphabet. He did real well at this, very apt pupil. It was forbidden by all rules and regulations for slaves to read and write or to have any kind of education. So she did this at the risk of her welfare and his too.
She told father that up north in Vermont was a place where if he could get up there, the white people would let him be free. But at any rate, all he was doing was filling these bottles when the mother came down behind the milk house because the little daughter somehow was making it obvious that she planned to be down at this milk house at certain times too. She came, and she had this big bull whip that they used to whip them with. And when she found the little daughter was just teaching father, and father had the primer. So she undertook to take the primer from father and send the little daughter to the house when father held on and started to fight her to keep the little primer in his own hands. And she struck him with the whip across the face and cut father's face, but he bled on the primer.
According to Daisy Turner, in 1862, at age 16, Alec decided to escape from the plantation and join the Army. The 1st New Jersey Cavalry was camped across the Rappahannock River, just a few miles from the plantation.
When the thing finally broke. But father said at that time, no one figured that anything would last only a few months. So when the first shots were fired and the war started, no one, he said, dreamed but that it would last and end up in just a few months. Instead of that, it run 4 long years. One of the bloodiest wars ever has been fought in history, with brother fighting brother, father to sons and family. That war run. But father said the thing went on, and the fights until he decided, and he got together other of the slave boys. There was over 100 of them that got together. But finally they said that they all kind of backed down, and father and them would go down to the edge of the river and the water and make waves and put the sheets on sticks and things and wave until the Union soldiers came over and swam over to them in boats and things. And father said that's how he first got in touch with the 1st New Jersey Cavalry.
Vermont storyteller Daisy Turner. I'm Barbara Jordan.
The masters had all the say. And what the masters couldn't handle, they had an overseer, white overseers and colored overseers that had charge of the business for them. One of them, I told you, was this Pusley that Papa shot.
According to Daisy Turner, her father Alec joined the Union Army after he escaped from the Viginia plantation where he had been born a slave. The cruel overseer of the plantation was named Presley, which they pronounced Pusley. Alec ran away and met up with the 1st New Jersey Cavalry, but 2 nights later, he went back.
The second day after my grandfather ran away from the plantation, he was one of 2 slaves who acted as guides for a volunteer raiding force to go across the Rappahannock to the Golden Plantation and capture rebel pickets and vedettes. They were successful in this raid, but an overseer named Presley was leaning out of the window and asked who was that out there, and my grandfather called his own name, and so that the man wouldn't recognize him again, he shot him.
According to records, Pusley was himself a slave who'd worked on the plantation for decades, so it's more than likely he was one of the overseers when Alec Turner shot him.
Father says they went back. Old Pusley was upstairs, and he came to the window and wanted to know what they wanted. And he says, "That you? Is that who is there?" Something like that. And Father says, "This is me. This is Alec." And he says, "I'm going to shoot you." And he said he shot him right through the stomach, like in his chest. And he was partway up on the ladder. The house wasn't too high. It was 2-story, I think he said. But anyway, Father shot him, and he fell. And when he fell, he hollered for water, to give him some cold water. But he died right there. And his father said they started sassing him or something, and he told him to remember something that he had done to him. I don't know what. So he said that was the first shooting that he done, was that Pusley. I've heard him tell that many and many a time.
I can remember my grandfather telling this story over and over again, and when he shot this overseer, it was a sort of retribution for some of the trials and tribulations that he and others had gone through.
Bruce Turner and his Aunt Daisy. I'm Barbara Jordan. Daisy Turner loved to recite poetry and knew several long Civil War poems. She especially liked one called The Doctor's Letter, because a family nearby was supposed to have received just such a letter, telling of the death of their 19-year-old son.
Dear Madam, I am a soldier, and my speech is rough and plain. I'm not much used to writing, and I hate to give you pain, but I promised I would do it, and he thought it might be so. If it came from one that loved him, perhaps it would ease the blow. By this time you must surely guess the truth I fain would hide, and you'll pardon me for rough soldier words while I tell you how he died. 'Twas the night before the battle, and in our crowded tent more than one brave boy was sobbing, and every knee was bent. For we knew not on the morrow, when this bloody work was done, how many of us that were kneeling there would see the setting sun. 'Twas not so much for self we cared as for the loved at home, because it's always worse to think of than to hear the cannons boom. It was then we left the crowded tent, your soldier boy and I, and we both breathed freer standing underneath the clear blue sky. I was more than 10 years older, but he seemed to take to me, and more oftener than the younger ones he sought my company. He seemed to want to talk of home and those that he held dear, while I had none to talk of, but I always liked to hear. And so he told me of the night and the time he came away, and how you sorely grieved for him, but you didn't bid him stay, and how his own fond hope had been that when this war was through, he might go back with honor to his home, to his friends, and you. He named his sisters one by one, and then a deep flush came when he told me of another, but he didn't speak her name. And then he said, "Dear doctor, it may be that I shall fall, and if so, will you write to those at home how I loved and spoke of all?" So I promised, but I didn't think the time would come so soon. The fight was just 3 days ago. He died today at noon. It seemed so hard that one so loved as he was should be gone, while I should still be living here who have no friends at home. It was in the morrow's battle, fast rained the shot and shell. I was standing close beside him, and I saw him when he fell. And so I took him in my arms and laid him on the grass. It was going against orders, but I think they let it pass. It was a Minnie ball that struck him. It entered at his side, but we didn't think it fatal till this morning, but he died. I wrapped his cloak around him as we bore him out tonight, and laid him among a clump of trees where the moon was shining bright. I have carved him out a headboard, as skillful as I could, and if you wish to find it, I can tell you where it stood. I'll send you back his hymn book, and the cap he used to wear, and the lock I cut the night before of his bright curly hair. I'll send you back his Bible. The night before he died, I turned its leaves together and read it by his side. I'll keep the belt he was wearing. He told me so to do. It has a hole upon the side, just where the ball went through. So now I've done his bidding. There is nothing more to tell, but I will always mourn with you the boy we loved so well.
Vermont storyteller Daisy Turner at age 100, reciting the Civil War-era poem, The Doctor's Letter. I'm Barbara Jordan. During the Civil War, Daisy Turner's father, Alec, worked as a doctor's orderly in the Union Army. After the war ended, the doctor got Alec Turner a job helping other freed slaves find work.
Then my father kept carrying, going back and forth, getting all of these ex-slaves as fast as they come in, refugees and things, to Washington. They had just like a hog pen there for them to stay till something could be done. Then as they could get them out, that was good. And father was working fast and doing wonderful, finding places and things for these ex-slaves. Then another set would come in.
One day in Washington, Alec Turner noticed a young girl standing with one of the ex-slave families. Her name was Sally Early. She was the daughter of a slave, Rachel, and a Confederate general, Jubal Early. Alec took a particular interest in Sally.
Father says he fell in love with my mother at once. When he first saw her, she was only 14, and she was crying. And so he went over and talked to her and made her feel better. So then they talked together quite a lot. If you would want to marry me, I would marry you, don't you see, and then look out for you just as long as we live, so you'd never have to be taken away from me.
After the wedding, the young bride and groom went to Boston, where they boarded a ship for Maine. They almost didn't survive the voyage.
When they got out in the ocean to a certain place between here, where they said there was a whirlpool, this peculiar storm came up, and the boat got bad going like, and when they got to this particular place, the boat struck a leak. And father told, I've heard him tell it so many times, glory to his name, that how the water came in, they put in the mattresses and they pumped the water. They done everything that could humanly be possible until they saw there was no hope. The boat was going to sink. And father said he prayed as much as he could and took Mama like in his arms, but he said, this woman, Papa said, she could pass for white, and she was kind of short, and she had blue eyes. But Father says she came out from where they were on the deck and rushed out in the open on the deck, and she raised her hands. She throw up her hands, and Father said she started praying. To Jesus Christ that was born in the manger of the Virgin Mary and died on the cross of Calvary and who had walked upon the sea. And her name was Liza. And Father said, almost instantly, the wind of that boat stopped rocking gradually, easily, and the water stopped coming in. The calm came, and the water stopped coming in the boat. And they pat her on the boat and said, "Pray, Liza, pray, Liza, pray on Liza." And Papa says that woman prayed. He don't know for how long, but he said everything calm. The boat stopped, and it went on, made that curve, and it made the place.
Daisy Turner, daughter of Sally and Alec Turner. I'm Barbara Jordan. Shortly after the Civil War, General O. Howard of the Freedmen's Bureau arranged to send a colony of freed slaves near Bangor, Maine, to work in the Merrill Slate Quarry. With them, says Bruce Turner, was his grandfather Alec.
My grandfather worked for Merrill in Williamsburg, Maine, in his slate quarry. He had brought a number of former slaves and relatives to Williamsburg to be with him while he was working in the quarry. During the evenings, he would teach these former slaves how to read and write and figure. They earned as much as 50 cents a day. When these workers went down into the quarry, they could be seen wearing a pencil behind their ear, which was an indication that this was a tool that they could also use in addition to the drills and the hammers which were used in quarrying.
Alec's daughter, Daisy Turner, remembers the ballads and hymns sung by her father and friends.
One of the songs they used to sing was, "Hail, brotherings, hail." And then my father would sing, "Hail, everyone, hail. Hail, everyone, hail. If you would walk the heavenly road, sing of Jordan stream. It's a beautiful stream. It's the very last river you'll cross. But it takes a valiant soldier to walk the heavenly road."
The freed slaves held prayer meetings where they joined hands and circled around the room singing.
John saw the number. John saw the number. John saw the golden number, the holy number sitting in the golden altar. Well, come along, Moses, and don't get lost, sitting in the golden altar. But strut your rod and come along cross, sitting in the golden altar. Well, John saw the number. John saw the number. John saw the holy number, sitting in the golden altar. If religion was the thing that money could buy, sitting in the golden altar, the rich would live and the poor would die, sitting in the golden altar. But I thank my God that it isn't so, sitting in the golden altar, for the poor have hope on Canaan's shore, sitting in the golden altar. Well, John saw the number. John saw the number. John saw the holy number sitting in the golden altar. That's a John in the Bible. He saw the number that was written on the stones of how they were to get the religion.
Winters at the quarry in Maine were harsh, the work and social conditions unfamiliar. By 1880, all families of freed slaves had moved away. This moment in the history of Williamsburg, Maine, lived on in the songs remembered by Daisy Turner.
Down by a drooping willow, where the violets early bloom, there lies a sweet young Ellen, so silent in her tomb. She died not broken-hearted, or sickness her befell, but by one sad, sad parting from the one she loved so well. One night when the moon was shining, as it oft had shone before, into her cottage lightly her jealous lover stole, saying, "Love, come let us wander down by..."
Daisy Turner. I'm Barbara Jordan. According to Daisy Turner, life was hard in the town of Grafton, Vermont, back in 1873. Two sawmill owners, Charles White and Vestus Wilbur, were out of workers and out of money. So they went to Boston for a loan, but had no luck. Heartbroken, Wilbur and White went back to the train station to return home.
So they were getting ready, had come down from Boston town to the North Station to take the train to come back up to Bellows Falls when they saw my father. And Papa stood there wiping his eyes like this because they had told him that my mother couldn't live through the day. And Charles White was wiping his eyes with tears because he knew they couldn't borrow the money and was coming back home, and the town of Grafton was lost.
It was a fruitful coincidence. Grafton Township needed strong workers, and Alec Turner needed a healthy environment for his young wife, Sally. He was in Boston looking for a doctor.
When Father saw this man crying, wiping his eyes, this white man, he felt sad. And then they saw Papa wiping his eyes, and they felt sad too. They were sad. So then they went over and asked my father if he knew of any more of the ex-slave boys strong like him that would like to come up in the country and work. They told my father what a healthy place Grafton was. And that his father said that was what started the word. That rung a bell right in him just like that when he said what a healthy place Grafton was. So then Father says, "Why did you say such a healthy place?" And so then they told them it was cold and snowy and all. And then Father told them that his wife was dying with old-fashioned consumption, and they hadn't given him only the day to think. So they said, "You don't mean it." So they said, "We'll pray." That's why I know there's power in prayer. The Father said they prayed right there in the North Station. And he had been so faithful and believing, my father, that he said that this warm wave just come over him there, and he knew. And so he said he said to them, "I won't go now," because he couldn't go right off from his work and everything. But he says, "You'll come back tomorrow morning, and I'll go with you. And my boss from Maine will be with me. I can get him. And we will go to the bank, and I'm sure they will let you have the money."
According to Daisy, Turner's boss did get them the money, and Turner returned with Wilbur and White to their Vermont sawmill. His wife recovered from her tuberculosis, and Daisy Turner was born in Grafton, Vermont, 10 years later in 1883. By Daisy's birth, her father had acquired 100 acres of land to farm. This was to be his home for 50 years. Alec called his farm Journey's End. I'm Barbara Jordan.
My grandfather was a big man, 6'3", 235. When he came to Grafton, he had the blacksmith make him a 5-pound axe. With this axe, he could cut twice as much wood as the ordinary Vermonter could with his 3.5-pound axe. He made twice as much money as any other individual. Consequently, he lived well, made enough money to take care of his family and to buy land.
According to Bruce Turner, his grandfather, Alec, arrived in Grafton, Vermont in 1872. Many people in town had never seen a colored man before.
A person named Culver, who was a little boy when my grandfather first came to Grafton. They had never seen a Negro before and couldn't understand why they looked the way that they did. He and other children followed my grandfather around the village and asked my grandfather to roll his sleeves up to see if he was the same color all over.
Alec Turner became known as the strongest man in town. His daughter, Vermont storyteller Daisy Turner, remembered that her father used to walk the 4 miles from home to market carrying a large pail of eggs in each hand and a third balanced on his head. One day his strength earned him an entire barrel of flour.
Bill Wyman said, if you could carry a barrel of that flour home, Alec, I'd give it to you. Well, Father said you're lost because I'll take it up when I go. So Father finally got ready and he got started. So he put the barrel of flour, and he told me many a time just how to do it, just right on the parallel of his shoulder, and started. And my father, glory to his name, Alexander, my father, I'm proud to be your daughter, went on up that road and up that hill and across that long field, because we lived in the shanty, and my father never set that barrel down until he got up in the shanty door. And there must have been at that time 40 men all following him with with little jugs of Jimmy John and hard cider and all. And Mother told many a time how after they all got up, they all got drunk. And they all was saluting him and congratulating on him. And my father carried that barrel of flour from Grafton village up on our hilltop for us children to eat, to have bread. Now that's the truth, if I never speak a word again.
Daisy Turner with memories of her father, Alec Turner. I'm Barbara Jordan. Daisy Turner, who died in 1988 at the age of 104, was a native of Grafton, Vermont. She had 12 sisters and brothers, and a childhood illness.
As a little girl, Aunt Daisy had rickets, and it lasted for quite a while. But her father and mother worked on her, and eventually she came out of it all right. I think it was about age 5 that she began to walk.
At a young age, Daisy heard prayers, recitations, hymns, and songs, which she learned and which became an important part of her life. And since she couldn't walk, Daisy Turner channeled her energy in other ways. One of them, poetry.
Men have done brave deeds, and bards have sung them well. But I, of a young girl's courage, now tale will tell. And I used to be always making up poems and things like that, because I couldn't walk and travel like the rest of them. So I'd be sitting down with the slate, making up things. And then Papa would give me a box of matches and arithmetic, and I used to lay them all down like that, 2 and 2 and 4.
Aunt Daisy used to like poems, and one of them that she made up was about Lawrence's Hill when my mother, Violet, her name was Violet, were up on Lawrence's Hill picking blueberries. Unbeknown to them, there was a bull walking around the field and was going to attack my grandmother only a few feet away. And luckily my mother had her rifle, and just a few feet before the bull charged her mother, she shot the bull and saved her mother from being gored.
And said, and when Violet heard Mama calling, Mama was running, and I said that she grabbed the rifle from the ground, knowing one shell was all, and at the mad pursuing bull, she sent the only ball. From her lips there rose no murmur, but from her heart there went a prayer. And when she opened her eyes in the sunshine, she knew that God was there. Because just 3 feet from her mother's lifeless form was the bull of that shot home. The bull had just about 3 feet. They measured it. If the ball hadn't struck him, he would have put it right into my mother in a minute.
Storyteller Daisy Turner at age 100. I'm Barbara Jordan.
Every year at the end of school, like June around, they had 2 days where all of the fathers and mothers attended recitations and readings and drawings and things and exhibits to show the parents what the children were doing.
Even as a little girl in the 1880s in Grafton, Vermont, Daisy Turner could make up rhymes and verses. This caused a special stir on one last day of school.
On this last day of school, it got to be, I guess, about almost the last week, when the teacher, for some unknown reason, decided to put on this dialogue showing all of the different countries and the nationalities and costumes to get this first prize. So the teacher wanted me to take Africa, a black doll, Dinah, and to say the poem that they had written for me to say. And I didn't want to do it, but after I went home and told my father the story, then my father told me it was no harm. And he explained how the different men built different houses, shapes, and painted them different colors. And it was just a matter of deciding which you liked and which was the loveliest in your own eyes and pleased you. And so if I was the little darker-skinned girl and took the dark-colored doll, I was just as lovely as the others, and what was the difference? So that was all right. I agreed. Until the day of this occasion, it was lovely. And every farmer wore his best overalls and clean white shirts, and the ladies all dressed up in their one dress of black alpaca or dark blues, and their hair fixed and everything. Amy Davis was the first one that come out. And she held her dolly very lovely in her arms and said, "My dolly came from sunny France. Her name is Antoinette. She's 2 years old on Christmas Day and a very darling pet." So she went on rambling about her doll and Antoinette. Then she went and set Antoinette out front on the seat and went back and twirled her skirts and fixed her hair ribbons and sat behind like the mother. So that's the way they went through that whole performance. And finally it got down to me with this black doll. So I said, I'm not going to do it. And of course the teacher and I was back behind, and she was saying, "Oh," and I was pulling, no, I wouldn't go. And she kept urging me. She said she'd let me wear her watch and that she'd give me paper money and all. So I finally consented. But I was so angry, my voice was high. And I said, "You needn't crowd my dolly out, although she's black as night. And if she is at the foot of this show, I think she'll stand as good a chance as the dollies that are white. My daddy says that half the world was nearly dark as night, and it does no harm to take a chance and to stay right in the fight. So stand up, Dolly." So sit up, Dolly, and look straight to the judges at the right. I'll stand right by your side if I do look afraid. And so I went on saying my piece through. But instead of saying the piece that the teacher had taught me to say, I was saying what I wanted to say on my own. And so I said, the teacher's face, as all can see, is redder than a beet. And Daddy'd come down from the back and it led her to a seat and gave to me that famous Turner look. So I'll sit down and shut my mouth up tight, just like a book. Well, nobody said a word for me. They didn't know what to make of it. They was all amazed. They didn't know whether they ought to applaud or whether it was good or bad. But it kind of broke up the thing. But when they got through with it in the end, they gave me the first prize. It was the $10 gold piece.
Storyteller Daisy Turner. I'm Barbara Jordan. In the late 1800s, Daisy Turner's father began shipping his poultry to Barry's Market in Boston. He marked his chickens and turkeys by clipping their hind toes. It was prize stock, says Daisy Turner, and all went well until one day when a check arrived from Boston, short by several $100s. That was a note.
A note saying, "We're awful sorry, Alec. We wasn't able to give you as much as we ought to, or as much as usual, or as much as you ought to deserve on this allotment of goods. But they aren't as good as usual this year, and we've had to dock you on them." And when Father took out the check and looked, he just put his hand to his face like that, and the tears would run right down to his face like that.
Daisy Turner took matters into her own hands. She dressed up in her finest, borrowed her mother's best pocketbook, and got on the train to Boston to find Merchant Barry.
I went right down to Barry's Market. So I said, "I'd like to see Mr. Barry. I want to see him because they have said that my father's turkeys and things had spoiled. And I came down, but to get the rest of our money." The men was all gathered from the market district up until maybe 18 or 20 of them had got around on the edge of this market where they was hanging up and watching to see what this little girl was going to do. So finally he came, and when he saw me, his face got just as red as blood. And then it got just as white and all, just like snow. And he staggered. I said, "You said that on this letter that my father's turkeys and the things had spoiled." And I said, "Mrs. So helped to pick them." And I said, "They all was packed in this nice paper that my father had got from you all. And we never had done this before." And I said, "Ours is the best in the market." And I said, "Those is our turkeys, and those is ours, and those is ours, and these is our chickens, and this is ours, and this box," I said, "those are the partridges. Uncle Early shot them." And I said, "My brother shot these," and all of this. And I began telling what our stuff was and hanging it. And I said, "My sisters told me not to come back to show my face without all of the money of my daddy's money in full, so we could have our coats and the rubber boots and shoes that we've got to have for school." And they all began, they all looked like they were kind of sick. Then the next thing I remembered, Mr. Barry stopped like that with his hands up at his face, and they led him out from where I was sitting in back in there. Well, I'd heard 2 or 3 of them laughing, "Ho, ho, 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 ho," and I couldn't see what the fun could be, but at any rate, they hadn't been gone out too long. The next thing I know, they came in with bags of candy sticking out at the top of the bags and cookies and things. They had great bags of oranges and a basket of fruit for my mother and all, and in another, a bottle of Alec, of whiskey. And then they put those envelopes in my pocketbook, and by that time it had got to be around 8 or 9 o'clock. And so the men said, "We'd better get her right back down to the station." So when the train came in at Bellows Ford, there was Violet and the girl again. So they said, "Did you get our father's money?" And I says, "I guess so. I don't know. But here's the bag," and everything was in it. So we had a time right there in Bellows Ford.
Vermont storyteller, Daisy Turner. I'm Barbara Jordan. Daisy Turner used to say that she and her father Alec were so close that they could communicate with each other psychically. And at one time, that saved a life. In the 1920s, Daisy Turner was working in Boston for a Mrs. Sherman Raymond, organizer of ladies' orchestras. One day, Daisy arrived at work and was hanging up her coat when suddenly there appeared before her an apparition of her father, Alec Turner.
At first, it was just a very faint gray light came into the room, and then it grew stronger and stronger. And finally, right out of this mist of gray, my father's form appeared, and it seemed like he spoke to me, and he says, "Gal, we need you." And this awful, awful, peculiar feeling went from my head right down to my toes, all down my spine, and my father's figure right before me.
Daisy Turner put her coat right back on and took the next train home to Vermont. There was too much snow for a sleigh. Daisy had to walk the final distance from the station to the farm.
It must have been at least almost 35 to 40 below. So I struggled through that snow, certainly 3.5 miles, maybe 4, the short cut through the woods, which brought me in the back of our house, through the barnyard, and back of the house. I could hear the dog howling. And as soon as I got into the house, my father says, thank God that you have come. And I said, what's wrong, Dad? And he says, it's your mother. She's been gone since morning.
Daisy's father, Alec, had been crippled in a farm accident. He couldn't get up to see what had become of his wife after she went outside and didn't come back.
It was a cold night, and she thought she would go across to the barn. And we had at that time, I guess, 500 or 600 hens. And so she would go across to pick up the eggs before they freeze. But at any rate, my mother had lost her way and couldn't find her way and had got too cold and was slowly freezing to death. And she had called, but no one could hear her, so she was just doomed. And there she was. And she had kept praying and calling, and that's what had kept the dog barking and whining, and my father so uneasy and happy and not knowing what to do. But at any rate, I just dropped everything and undone the dog, untied him and let him loose. And I could see faint footsteps, but no sound. But Belle kept going and finally crossed the brook. And after she got to the brook, Mother had crawled up beside one of the old black stumps, and she had rolled quite a way, but she was just about gone. But she was able, she says, my God, my God. And I just grabbed her in my arms, and she was cold with all nothing but ice and snow. And she had been out there certainly since 8 o'clock that morning in that awful cold. Well, the dog got hold of her skirts and me and helped me, and together we dragged my mother. We worked like that. Maybe it took me 3/4 of an hour to get her across the narrow steps and over the little brook and then down the road to the house. But when we got her to the kitchen floor, we just grabbed her clothes, tore everything right off of her, got some brandy down her mouth with a teaspoon, and Father just kept praying. That is why I know that there is such power in prayer. There's power in prayer. Father prayed, and I prayed, and worked like 60. So I got Mother rolled in these warm blankets right on the kitchen floor and kept giving her warm brandy with the teaspoon. So that's the way it worked out, but we saved our mother's life. And I never could have saved her if it hadn't been for my father speaking to me in Mrs. Sherman Raymond's studio at 94 Huntington Avenue.
Storyteller Daisy Turner. I'm Barbara Jordan. Around the turn of the century, the Turner household in Grafton, Vermont became a kind of community social center, while local farmers and their families came to join in the dances and holiday celebrations.
And we used to have square dances in the 16 by 16 foot maple floored kitchen. My uncles used to play. I used to join them. When there were Christmas parties and people used to drop in, they had a fiddler who was hired from the village or the next village. And Aunt Daisy would do most of the calling, calls such as ladies on the right,
and the left,
gentlemen on the
gentlemen
left.
on the left. And then they'd all salute their partners. First of all, salute your partners, and then swing your partners and turn the same.
The highlight of the evening would sometimes be a poetry recitation. An old New Year's poem Daisy Turner used to recite is the melodramatic tale of a young woman who'd had a baby and was deserted by her lover.
And this is New Year's Eve, Mother. Ah, Mother, can it be? And what a sad, sad change, Mother, this year has wrought in me. Last year there was no merrier heart than mine. There was no brighter eye. There was no lighter step than mine. Now, Mother, what am I? A theme for every idle jest, sunk lower than the slave, with a blighted name and a broken heart, and very near my grave. For I feel that my day is numbered, my sand is running fast, and the thought is strong within me that this day is my last. Of a group of lad and lasses, methinks I catch a glance, my old companions will be there, just hieing to the dance, and they will spend the night away in noisy mirth and glee, while the shelter of a prison cell alone remains for me. I remember last year's sleigh ride, Mother, over the frozen snow, and how we danced till daylight, and the sky was all aglow. I was the lightest hearted one of all that merry throng, and he was by my side, Mother, whom I had loved so long. I know you often warned me, Mother, and told me of a truth, how village maids were seldom wed by high and lofty youths. But I thought me of the tales I'd read, and of the songs I'd sung, how lofty lords wed village maids when beautiful and young. For I prized too much my beauty, which has fully been my bane, and scorned the poor and honest ones that offered me their name. And now they will not speak to me, I am a thing so vile. They pass me with a meaning look, or with a mocking smile. 'Tis very hard, and yet I think I know, if they had borne what I have borne, I wouldn't treat them so. For I am bowed in deep disgrace by one I love beguile. He has left me in my shame alone, and he will not own his child. But even now I do not think as hard of him as you. I do not think as hard of him as many others do. I know he's done me bitter wrong, and bowed my head in shame, and yet it wasn't all his fault. I might have been to blame. And the time will come when he will feel his need to be forgiven, and you'll forgive him then, dear Mother, when I have gone to heaven. Poor babe, she has her father's face, his bright and laughing eye. Had she a right to bear his name, how happy I could die. But if she's like me, Mother, a bit wayward, a bit wild, though it is a bitter legacy to leave a guileless child, tell her all of my story, though she thinks of me with hate. Better to scorn her mother's name than to share her mother's fate. But do not weep for me, Mother, when I have left you here, for within a peaceful dwelling house will dawn my new year.
Daisy Turner, remembering a New Year's recitation from childhood. I'm Barbara Jordan. In the 1920s, Daisy Turner worked in Boston and sent her income back to Vermont to help her family. At the age of 40, she became engaged to Joseph Bonet.
He was an automobile dealer and sold the Moon automobile. It was understood, as far as she was concerned, that they were to be married. It never came to pass because he had eyes for someone else. As a result of this, she put a suit on him for breach of promise, alienation of affection, and heart bomb.
Mr. Barney was a little short, stout man, very nice, and he seemed very fond of Aunt Daisy. Mr. Barney was white, and it being a sort of a interracial case, it was very unusual at that time that they took it to court.
When the verdict was announced, her first words were, "I am vindicated."
The Boston papers carried a photograph of Daisy Turner, decked out in a hat of the latest fashion, with the caption, "Miss Daisy J. Turner of Lexington, Massachusetts, was awarded $3,750 from Joseph V. Bonnet, automobile dealer, whom she also charged with breach of promise and alleged false larceny." I'm Barbara Jordan.
And so our life run very easy, like a book, just like a brook running. There was never no disharmony. And if anyone was going to go anywhere, everybody was interested to have that one go. And if they didn't have enough money, $1, $1.50, everybody would give 5 cents or 10 cents of their money. Or go and take it out the bank and let them have it, or loaned it to them. And if you had any food or anything special, we always shared with each other.
Daisy Turner says their farm was called Journey's End because her father never wanted to go any farther after he got to that hilltop in Grafton, Vermont. Alec Turner and his family cultivated 100 acres and planted fruit trees, corn, potatoes, beans, and hay. He had 2 working oxen and 2 milk cows. Journey's End was Turner's home for half a century. Alec Turner, born a slave in Virginia in the 1840s, died in Grafton, Vermont in December 1923.
I can remember hearing my grandfather say that he didn't think too much of these automobiles and flying machines. He always said that when he died, he didn't want to go to the cemetery in the hearse that was not drawn by a horse. Consequently, when he died in December 23, he was carried to the cemetery in a hearse drawn by a horse. He also used to say that when he was in his grave, he didn't want anyone to come to the cemetery and put flowers on his grave. And if they did, he was going to make smoke come up out of the ground.
All the people that did know him, ever know him, liked him, loved him, and they all knew that he was unusual and that he was smart. But I think he got a part of his strength and smartness from God, from spiritual life, because he was spiritual. And he fell on his knees, and he talked with God. He talked with Jesus. And then they used to sing the little hymn as I told you. Oh, little talk with Jesus, how it smoothed the rugged road, and how it helps me onward when I'm faint beneath the load, when my heart is crushed with sorrow, when my eyes with tears are dim. There is naught can give me comfort but a little talk with him. Oh, little talk with Jesus makes it right, all right. A little talk with Jesus makes it right, all right. In trials of every kind, thank God I always find, if I have a little talk with Jesus, then it's right, all right. And he used to sing that piece and go to his knees. And I knew he got spiritual strength from Jesus Christ.
Storyteller Daisy Turner. I'm Barbara Jordan. For most of her 104 years, Daisy Turner lived in the house built by her father Alec at Journey's End, their farm in Grafton, Vermont. In 1962, when Daisy was almost 80 years old, Journey's End burned, and with it was burned a household of history.
So we just lost everything. Everything right in that house went down. I died twice in life. The day my father died and the day that house went down. That beautiful, beautiful Turner house went down in ashes. That's something never to be forgotten.
Gone in the blaze was the blood-stained primer carried by Alec Turner throughout the Civil War. Gone, too, were the old photographs of Daisy Turner's grandparents, the slave woman Rachel, the Confederate General Jubal Early. The things were gone, but not the memories. Daisy Turner lived another 26 years, reciting poems, singing songs, and telling about family history. She was proud of her heritage and understood the value of her family tradition.
See, we didn't just come from nothing and nowhere. We've got a background, and the background be traced right down to the roots.
When I was little, we used to go over to her house all the time. She used to tell a lot of tales and songs and poems and everything. And she tried to help everybody all the time, and just incredible memory.
Aunt Daisy passed away in February of 1988.
Daisy Turner died at the age of 104. On her last birthday, she recited, from memory, without hesitation, a poem that went on for 17 minutes. We can still hear her voice because 6 years ago, Daisy Turner began recording her life story for the Vermont Folk Life Center.
How beautiful my father died. And that is why that was one of his favorite pieces, My Savior First of All. He used to love to sing that, when my life's work is ended, and I cross the swelling tide. And that bright and glorious morning I shall see. I will know my Redeemer when I pass the other side, and his smile will be the first to welcome me.
Vermont storyteller, poet, and family historian, Daisy Turner. I'm Barbara Jordan, and this is Journey's End.